Hello and welcome to the M.B.Om podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. M.B.Om is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at M.B.Om, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the M.B.Om podcast. I'm really excited that you're joining me for today's episode of the show. And today on the podcast, I am really excited to be joined by Pamela Seelig. Pamela is a yoga teacher as well as the author of Threads of Yoga, Themes, Reflections, and Meditations to Weave into Your Practice. And in this episode of the podcast, we talk about how yoga studios and yoga teachers can begin to expand their offerings from just the physical asana and bring in more meditation, breathwork, and yoga philosophy to their classes and offerings, and really how to do this in a way that feels accessible and interesting to students. So based off of Pamela's lifelong practice, her teaching, as well as everything that she discusses in her book, she has lots of great tips and information to share. So I hope that you really enjoy this episode. Before we get into it, I just wanted to give a shout out to our sponsor for this episode, OfferingTree. OfferingTree is your one-stop shop for all things yoga business, including your website, email list, scheduling, payment plans, courses, memberships, and so much more. I'm going to tell you more about them later on in this episode, but for now, you can head on over to offeringtree.com/MBOM to check them out. All right, now let's get into it. Without further ado, here is Pamela. Welcome to the podcast today, Pamela. I'm really excited to have you here with me today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Amanda.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to dive in with you. And I was thinking a good place to start would be to back up and just talk a little bit about your yoga story. Can you share a bit about how you got into yoga and what inspired you to become a teacher?
Oh, sure. Well, this goes back a bit to the 80s. I was working on Wall Street in finance, and it was a very intense job. You know, I didn't really understand the notion of balance yet at that time. So I was definitely not healthy and started to feel the toll, and some physical issues. And one morning I woke up and half of my face was paralyzed. So it was kind of dramatic. I went to the emergency room and I found out it was something called Bell's palsy, which is not that uncommon, not life-threatening. And I was told I would recover probably, but it would take months. So it really stopped me in my tracks. And there was also the possibility of no recovery. So it was very frightening. So it was really the first time that I had had any physical issue, and kind of the first time where things really I couldn't control the situation. It just wasn't going my way and I just didn't know what to do. So started to visit a lot of doctors who all told me the same thing. You just have to wait, which I was not very good at. But one kind of took pity on me, and he asked if I had ever looked at alternative medicine or meditation. So I didn't know what alternative meditation was, but I did obviously hear of meditation. So I got a book, just skimmed it. I couldn't really read because I had one eye. It was pre-internet, so there wasn't information everywhere. And I didn't know any better. So I just started meditating like a lot, like for hours. I didn't know you should, sort of start slowly. And I had nothing else to do. I couldn't go to work, etc. So I started meditating and just found first that I loved it. And I think part of that was it was a bit of an escape from my thoughts, which were in panic at that time. And I started to kind of have like a see phenomena, like things like lights, when my eyes were closed and when my eyes were open, I could see the lights in the room. Went to the eye doctor, wasn't sure what was happening. Everything was fine. But things like that, hearing noises, and I had no idea what was happening. asked a lot of people. Finally, somebody told me to look up yoga. And I thought, that's strange. Yoga, I didn't know that was connected to meditation. But when I read about, some of these phenomena, it was exactly what I was experiencing. So I knew that it was true and learned about energy and prana and, that I really had to settle this energy down. That was part of my issue and had some tools then to work with. So that's how I really got into yoga and meditation. It was reluctant. I don't think I would have ever turned in this direction had I not had something as dramatic, which I think is a lot of people's stories, at least back then, before yoga was so mainstream. Um, I used to just think it was something, sort of for flaky people on the side. It wasn't for me and had just those bad stereotypes about it. Um, but of course, now I'm very grateful. I wouldn't wish Bell's palsy on anyone. It's not fun, but it did open up this world to me that I am now so grateful for having, gotten that kind of harsh introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely like a tough way to get into it. But I guess, the universe provides in mysterious ways sometimes. And it's great to hear that you're, obviously doing better and whatnot, and that you were able to get into yoga and really kind of set like the path of your whole life. Can you share a little bit about like the journey with yoga and then kind of stepping into, your teaching and more of what you're doing now with it?
Yeah, sure. I it did have a decent recovery, but it did take months. So I really got to dive deeply into the information, and then I stayed in the financial industry for many years, maybe 5 to 7 years, but read everything I possibly could about yoga, which I learned was kind of synonymous with meditation. Began to find some classes physical classes, not just meditation. Um, Traveled. I found workshops and things around that I could get into for long weekends. So really, just did years of that. Just fascinated by the subject, and so eventually, slowly left that career, and life happened. Had 2 kids. Um, Eventually went to a teacher training back in 2006 and my first one. And, that was just amazing, not thinking I would be a teacher. But of course, afterward, began teaching some friends at a local convent in town. And that grew. And then in 2009, opened a studio. And it just kind of went one step at a time, but it was just a beautiful kind of unfolding. There was no grand plan, um, and taught um, physical postures, obviously, but always trying to weave in the philosophy that I love so much. And I found that kind of tricky. And there were, I looked for books to help with that, and I really couldn't find what I was looking for. There's a lot of good books out there, but not necessarily for teachers trying to provide this information like in a class setting. And that's eventually what inspired me to write a book. That idea of trying to bring this information into a class setting. It expanded from that as I was writing because there were so many, I felt like students, practitioners who wanted to learn more than what could typically be provided in a typical class, 60 to 90-minute class. So the book is, for practitioners and teachers, but that was the initial inspiration was for teachers like myself who were always was looking for inspiration and information. And
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
Thanks for sharing all of that. And I definitely want to dive, excuse me, more into your book. But before we get there, I want to hear a little bit about owning a studio. You said you owned a studio in 2009. Is that right?
Yeah, that's when we opened the studio.
And how long did you own it for?
For 9 years. And it was myself initially and my good friend, who was a Pilates instructor. So she handled the Pilates and I handled the yoga. And it was a sort of thriving business for many years. My business partner moved. So the last couple of years I was on my own. And in 2018, I was moving part-time I live outside of New York City in New Jersey, but my husband and I were empty nesting and we were moving back into the city. So I decided to sell the studio because, as any studio owners out there know, you really do have to be there full time for it to work properly. So a good friend purchased the studio and it's still going strong. She has been managing it through the COVID pandemic beautifully. So that's great to hear. And I continue to teach workshops there, but primarily I'm online now. But yeah, so had the studio for 9 years. Learned a lot. I have such appreciation now for any small business owner, but yoga studios especially. There's a lot to deal with. So great learning experience.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I've worked with studios for a number of years and you don't really realize like how many hats a studio owner wears until you start getting into that and you're like, oh wow, it's not just, all sunshine and rainbows and teaching classes whenever you want and all of that type of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that goes into actually running a successful studio.
Right. Your accounting, insurance, IT, customer service.
Yeah, sometimes maintenance.
Yes. Oh, yeah, that's for sure.
So I would love to talk a little bit about, I think that as yoga teachers, we're obviously all familiar with like the physical postures, the asana. And I think that one of the things that I really discovered when I stepped into the world of teaching yoga was how deep the well of yoga was. And I think that as teachers, we know this and we want to start sprinkling these practices and stuff into these teachings into our classes, but it can be often hard to, I guess, sort of get people learning about things that are not just yoga asana, because a lot of people know of the yoga poses. They hear that yoga is good for flexibility or maybe for weight loss or, strength, and they kind of want a workout. And I think, for me as a teacher, I'm like, but there's so much more that you need to learn. And, studios are such a great place where we can start integrating those other teachings in. So I'd love to hear a little bit about, from you, some of your thoughts or your tips or best practices for how we can start like weaving in these other aspects of yoga into our studios and into our classes.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky because when you have a class, people are there for different reasons and you know it. And if somebody is there just for a physical workout, and you really can't talk for 20 minutes, and having students sit while you lecture on the 8-limbed path. So it's definitely tricky. So I remember, especially as I was teaching in the first couple of years, some clumsy attempts, to try to weave in. And I found I would sound preachy or cheesy, and I could hear myself, and it was just very difficult. But I was so, I wanted so much to share this, beautiful information. And I also felt like if I didn't, you're sort of shortchanging, because these are yoga students. So you want to, give the more than the just one small aspect, which is asana. And asana is amazing. It's an important part of yoga. For many of us, that first feeling of bringing awareness consciously into the physical body and breathing. And I don't want to discount asana, obviously, but I found over time what worked for me was having a theme. And not necessarily every class, but if I had a theme, I could start with, a couple of minutes in the beginning while people were settling and getting seated into their breath about the theme for today. And it might be surrender, and talking about what that means for yoga. It's not waving the white flag. It's about letting go of what we no longer need. And, just speaking in a way from a yogic perspective and having a plan throughout class of experiencing surrender. And surrender is a good one because you can actually physically experience that as you're in forward fold, standing forward fold and really letting go of the shoulders and feeling the head hanging and surrendering all the tension and the thoughts and feeling that. And so it's a kind of an easier one to bring in a theme. Having quotes. So maybe you're holding a pose, pigeon posture, and having a quote about, letting go as people are breathing. So they can really hear the quote, maybe integrate that deeper aspect of the quote as they're holding the posture and breathing. And then having maybe a special yoga nidra where you surrender the weight of the body into the floor and guide students through a letting go of their thoughts throughout class. So one aspect of bringing this wisdom into class is just having a theme. But there are others too. And I think now I guess 10 years ago, I feel like yoga really became popular and mainstream. So there's a lot of students now out there that have been practicing yoga for longer than 5 years. And I feel like there's a lot of desire or hunger for this information. So I do think now a yoga teacher could, offer a special course for this kind of information that includes movement. But I think there's a lot of students now who get like, wow, there's more here and I want to learn more. So even other than themes, weaving those into a typical class, there are other ways I think too to get this information out there in a yoga class.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for sharing that. I like the idea of like weaving it into kind of this, I guess maybe your more like typical physical vinyasa type flow classes in these like really little ways, like kind of like giving a little dusting of this type of experience. And then maybe having classes where you're bringing in more of that like yoga nidra or even like meditations adding to classes. Like, maybe it's like a 75-minute class where the last 10 minutes is meditation or something like that. So people are kind of getting this familiarity with these other techniques that are not just, the physical asana.
Right. I do. I think if you have the ability to teach a little bit of a longer class and, say the last 15 minutes are meditation, because I think now with all the scientific research that's out there and every day there's another study about meditation and the benefits that people are like, geez, everyone, I really should be meditating. But when you begin to meditate, especially if you're on your own, just at home, it's really challenging. So to have that guidance in a class setting, especially if you already have a yoga practice, I think there's really willing participants out there now. And I think meditation is just such a natural because especially if you've done your movement, you've done your postures, you're so open that you can really get that taste of the beautiful aspect of meditation, not just the work of it, trying to, quiet the mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that I'm definitely hearing and seeing more stuff kind of in like, I guess, like the mainstream on meditation and the science behind meditation and how it can be really beneficial. And I think that there's more and more people who are recognizing that they struggle with things like stress or they're not sleeping well. And they're hearing that, things like yoga or mindfulness or meditation might be able to help with this. So they're kind of seeking that out. What about the other kind of aspects of maybe the philosophical or more like esoteric sides of yoga or even things like pranayama? Because I feel like, obviously we're all living and breathing. And so it's sometimes a hard sell to like get somebody into like a breath class or a breath workshop or something like that. Cause they're like, I know how to breathe. I've been doing this since I left the womb. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. I think people don't appreciate the power of the breath. I think, yogis understood it. It's one of the 8 limbs, pranayama. But we think, gosh, breath is just here. It's like blinking our eyes. Like, do we really have to think about it? But when you can consciously manipulate the breath, now we know it affects our physiological body, like our physiological, when you talk about insomnia, stomach issues, anxiety, depression, the breath is a powerful medicine. We just need to know the tools to use it. And yoga was definitely ahead of the curve on this. I feel like, meditation, everyone knows now. They may not be practicing meditation, but they know how good it is for you. I think breath is right there, right behind, the bestseller now. One of the bestsellers books now are just called Breath, and it's like, wow, it's out there. And it's one of the 8 limbs. So just like offering a class that the last 15 minutes is meditation, I think the same can be done for breath work. Although I don't think it may not be as popular for like what you stated, people still aren't really sure. And also it can be very challenging to work with the breath. To do pranayama for 15 minutes can be really challenging, but extremely powerful. I think in terms of other philosophical ways to bring philosophical ideas into class, I think, learning about the energy body and the chakra system. Again, most students have heard the word chakra, but they may not really know what that is. And you can offer an 8-week course on yoga and the chakras, where the first week is, what is this system? As you move a class, so including movement. The second week, really focusing on the root chakra and poses that stimulate hip opening in that area. And then the second week, week 2, moving to the sacral, and then up the body. And people love it. They don't want to miss, especially not the throat, the third eye, the crown chakra. Really focusing on meditation in that class. And I think it's something different and something that students will get excited about, especially those who have been practicing for several years and want to learn a little bit more and experience it in their body, experience the energy in their body through poses, through breath work, through meditations that focus specifically on the chakras. That's one idea. Another might be a 10-week yama and niyama class. That's not really as much movement, but you could do classes that focus on the first yama, nonviolence. As we move, listening to that inner voice, seeing if it's harsh, if it's judgmental, and being kinder to yourself, and moving through the postures, through the yamas and niyamas for 10 weeks like that. So weaving in the philosophy as you teach a class, providing more information that I think students are craving now.
Yeah, I think especially kind of more, I guess, quote unquote, like advanced students, you could say. And I say that as in like, practitioners who've been practicing for quite a while, and they're looking for something a little bit deeper out of their yoga practice. And they're perhaps like looking to learn more about the philosophy of yoga, and maybe they've heard Patanjali's, 8-limbed path, and they are curious what this is all about. I feel like that's definitely the type of student that I could see being a little bit more curious with this. One of the things I'm curious about, because I do feel like there is a lot of, science and I guess like mainstream information around meditation and the benefits of that, and even yoga and the benefits of that. When it comes to more of these like philosophical, more esoteric ideas, obviously as teachers who have studied them, we understand, the benefits that these can provide to your life. But I feel like these aren't the types of things that are being talked about as much, I guess, in these like mainstream areas. How do we sell somebody on like spending time learning about the yamas and the niyamas when maybe they're not sure of like how it's going to benefit them, and it's also not, going to help with their 6-pack and that type of thing?
Yes. Yeah, I think it really is about, when you have a yoga class, the students in front of you, it's such a gift. We're in such a sacred space. We're so fortunate, privileged, and honored to be in that position. And I think, the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, I feel are the most accessible in terms of a text. This 2,000-year-old foundational text. I find once students hear, it's just the first 3 sutras, they want to know more. So the first sutra is now we begin the yoga practice, or there's different translations, but now we begin. So the second sutra tells us what yoga is. And I think most students are astounded or surprised to hear Patanjali tells us yoga is the quieting of the mind. That's what it is. And then he tells us how, through the 8-limbed path. How do we quiet the mind? One of the limbs, one of the ways is through postures. So very important. But that's just one limb. You don't have to do all of the limbs to be fully self-realized, but it's a map. So I think that information can be brought, maybe not in a beginner, people's first class, but pretty early on. Yoga is the quieting of the mind. The very next sutra, I think, is so amazing and so beautiful, and it's what students need to know. And what teachers, I think, can teach right fairly early is why. Why quiet the mind? Why are we here? Really? We are drawn to yoga for all different reasons, and they're all valid. I want to be healthy. I want to be at my optimal weight. I want to sleep better, whatever. We're there. But Patanjali tells us yoga is the quieting of the mind. And why? The next sutra says, and then the seer abides in her true nature. And then the seer abides in their true nature. That's why we do it. It's why we quiet the mind, so that we can know who we really are, our true nature, know ourselves. So I do believe that when students, if we can, that's those 2 sutras, yoga's quieting of the mind, so we can abide in our true nature. If we share that a few times with our class, kind of like, so that sinks in, it opens the door. It opens the door. Even that person who's there, who's the runner, who's there because she's or he is trying to get more flexibility and, just for the physical aspect, they are curious now to know our true nature, to know who am I? This is the human big question. And yoga tells us how to do that. And also we can experience it for ourselves in these movements, with this breath, with this meditation. So I do think that is what will get students then curious about the 8-limbed path, so that then you can say, maybe if you want to learn more about the 8 limbs, more than asana, I have a course or I have a class that we're going to talk about that. Maybe we'll move, maybe depending on your style, you can do it with movement, or you can just do a workshop, about the 8 limbs and what they are. I think students are interested. And there's lots of, we're all different. We all have our own teaching styles. And it's important to know that, like, who we are, what's authentic for me, and to do it in your unique way, to share this information. But I do think that it's, especially when students are practicing for a few years, maybe 3 years or more, just naturally, students just want to know this information, want to learn how to meditate, want to learn about breath. And the yamas and niyamas, that's the ethical precepts. That's a different subject. That's another whole area that draws another kind of student who are interested in that. So we could go in that direction as well.
Hey, yoga teachers. We're just taking a quick break from the podcast episode to talk about OfferingTree and online courses. When it comes to courses, there are so many different ways that you can go about creating them. You could create a step-by-step video course that teaches students about a specific skill or specialization. You could sell or rent on-demand videos, repurposing your online classes, or you could decide to bundle your courses or classes with a membership instead of selling them as standalone items. Every yoga business is different, but if you want to start offering on-demand video content, I recommend using OfferingTree. First of all, you'll have complete control of who gets your content, including who can see it and who can download it. You get unlimited video uploads, and you can offer content as a part of a membership, charge one-time fees, or use sliding scale pricing. Drip content out over time, offer limited access rentals, sell recordings, and so much more. The possibilities really are endless, and that's just one reason why I love OfferingTree. But don't just take it from me. There are so many users of OfferingTree that really, really love the software as much as I do. Chrisanne, a yoga teacher based in Colorado and the owner of Love Sauce Yoga, shared, "I just want to say thank you so much for this amazing website builder. Not only has it uplifted my confidence as an online yoga teacher, but it's helped me to find my niche in the yoga teaching world and connect with students." So if you're looking to get started with a website for your yoga business, or you're looking for an online tool that's easier and cheaper than what you're using now, definitely check out OfferingTree. And because you listen to M.B.Om, you'll get a special discount. Just head over to offeringtree.com/M.B.Om for 15% off an annual plan or 50% off 3 months. And don't forget that everyone gets a 14-day free trial. Once again, that's offeringtree.com/M.B.Om. All right, now back to the show. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think that you're right. Like when people have been practicing, there's kind of like a natural curiosity towards this, especially if you've heard a teacher mention something about it, or maybe if they've like you said, themed a class around something or brought a quote in, or maybe they've shared something from the Yoga Sutras and you're like, the Yoga Sutras, like, what is this? And then you go home and you do a little Google search and you start kind of learning about it. There's kind of this natural curiosity to want to learn more about the practice. And I think that it's really like our job as yoga teachers to just be slowly, weaving these teachings in so that people are kind of drawn to learning a little bit more, and then having other offerings like you were talking about with maybe, a registered program or a course, or maybe some sort of like extended workshop or something like that. I think that's a really cool way to kind of, give people, I guess, what they're looking for and what they're expecting out of maybe like a 60 or 75 minute like flow class, while also kind of honoring the teachings of yoga and weaving in more philosophical teachings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And knowing, if you have like a brand new beginner class, that they come and they're sitting, they need to know how to be comfortable, physically moving on their mat. Like, I think, when is the right time to bring these ideas in. But also I was always a little nervous or reluctant to, because they're so important. Like, to me, I love this information so much. I was nervous to bring it in, but I was always surprised at, the one student that would afterward come up and ask for more information. And it was usually the person that I kind of least expected that might be were interested. So I just learned to be a little bit more open-minded and, step out of my own comfort zone, of just doing sort of the same things over and over, because they worked, and success, people seem to like, certain styles of classes and how things went. But stepping out of the comfort zone can sometimes, bring some new rewards and some new learning. So it's worth it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And also on that note, I just want to kind of bring up too that I think sometimes as a teacher, and especially if maybe you're a newer teacher within your first 5 years of teaching, it can often feel like really intimidating to bring up the yoga philosophy, because sure, you've learned it in training, you've probably studied it a bit more yourself, you have probably read some key books around it, but sometimes it can feel like, the philosophical aspect of yoga is so important to the practice of yoga. You also want to like honor it as you teach it, right? And so it can kind of feel a little bit scary sometimes to bring these teachings into your teachings as a teacher.
Exactly. That's so well put. I agree. That's what it was, intimidating for me, trying to honor the roots of yoga, the practice. And I had to really come to the place where I have, it's like the physical practice. You have to do your practice, to be able to teach. And so I did my reading, I did study, but I had to also say, I don't have to be an expert. I don't have to know everything. I'm just sharing, what I know. And if someone asks a question and I don't know the answer, that's okay. We're all learning. And so, to be secure enough and not think you have to know everything and have your PhD in philosophy to share some of these teachings.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And yeah, I think just, starting to weave it into the best of your ability, I think is something that can be really important to honoring, the history and the background of yoga, and then to also teach at a deeper level and whatnot. And I know this really ties into your book, Threads of Yoga. And one of the things that I really love is when we were first talking via email, one of the things that you said was yoga draws many practitioners because of its physical benefits, but it's often the experience of peace that people return for. And I feel like this was so much my experience of being like, oh, yoga is good for me physically. It can be a workout. And I was that, little teenage yogi who was clenching all my muscles, even when like the teacher would be like, relax into the pose or something like that, because I just wanted to get a workout. And over the years, as I've practiced and expanded my practice, I've really felt that it's so much more for me than just the physical aspect, and really like that peace of mind, like mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that experience for you and how that really, I guess, inspired you to write your book.
Oh, thanks. Well, yeah, I had the same thing. I started when I did started the physical practice. So separate from meditation, I just went to my first yoga class. I felt so good. And I was there, actually I had a back issue, a lower back problem. So I thought that would help. And so I really didn't, I just thought it would be stretching or whatever, but it wasn't. And I felt so good. And that's what brought me back. It was this feeling of, I said it, I used to describe it. It's like you got a good workout, like your muscles were a little shaky after class, but also you had the sensation that you just had a massage as well. It's like the combo that I loved, that feeling of like clenching in my stomach released. Like I was peaceful and I just didn't care why I felt so good, but I just kept going back because I loved that feeling. And it took a while for me to start to say, like, why? What is different about yoga than regular working out, which I love too, but I didn't know what it was that brought me, but it kept bringing me back. And then you learn over time as a practitioner and more as a teacher, the why that is. But that's I feel like that was my experience too of just for some reason getting to this peaceful place and wanting that more, even if it was at a subconscious level in the beginning. Because I think in our modern day culture, it's go, go, go. And we're very externally focused. All of our senses focus outward. Our mind is filtering the external stimuli, and our lives become completely out there if we don't know any better. And yoga reverses that. It's like close your eyes or just look inward. Even if you're moving in a challenging posture, you're feeling the breath, letting the muscles relax that can in a posture. And you're not looking outward, you're sensing within. This is a revelation. This was for me, but I think for many people, this is a revelation. So we're not looking outward for the first time, or maybe we did as a child. We had that natural inward experience of imagination, but we lose it as we grow up often. So it's this inward experience, this embodiment and finding that balance between that inward feeling who we are and experiencing the external world, which is not bad. I love the world. It's beautiful, but it's not, we have to have that balance of not just focusing on the external. And today with social media and just regular, advertising media, it's like a science of how to distract us and tell us what we need to be happy. I mean, we are focused on from the world of media with precision. And so if we're not conscious of that, we can live our whole lives looking outward, thinking we should do this or this, I need that, and that's not true. It's just an illusion. It's just not true. And when we take a breath and we feel how we're feeling on the inside, inwardly, it changes everything. It's a little thing, seems like a little thing, just focusing on the breath, feeling sensation in the body, moving in this way. It doesn't seem that big of a deal, but it is a huge shift that can transform our lives. So I think it's that experience that is really below the surface, maybe subconscious, of what's bringing people back to class. They can read in a New York Times this new study about meditation increases immunity, lowers blood pressure. And that's not why the ancient yogis meditated in caves, to lower blood pressure. There's deeper reasons.
I mean, they probably didn't have problems with their blood pressure because they weren't eating crap food.
True. True. They had other issues.
For sure. For sure.
Right. But it's those side effects, those positive side effects, they're just side effects. The practice is about knowing who you are. And that this is the indescribable, words can't go here, but we try because we only have words. But when you go that deep, when you're in these deeper states that, the texts describe, you're not separate. We're all connected. You have this experience of oneness. You don't believe anything, So that's that's the experience. And this state of peace that you find has all these positive effects on the body. And so even if you don't know that, you don't know the ultimate realization of yoga, you've never learned that, it's never been in front of you, you just practice yoga, you're getting all these benefits incrementally, you're evolving as a person. So you don't really even have to know necessarily, that the ultimate self-realization stages that the yogis talk about, but you're learning for yourself. You're on the inward journey, whether you're conscious of it or not. So it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for sharing that. That's very, very beautiful. And is that kind of the theme that you've kind of integrated into your book?
Well, it starts with the idea of, the sutras, what is yoga and why do we really do it? This idea of abiding in our true nature. And then it's 30 chapters basically of how to bring that into your class or your practice, whether you're a practitioner or a teacher, with, things like present moment awareness or mindfulness or being in the moment, whatever word you use, being in the now. Like, what is that? And how do you practice that? And if you're a teacher, how do you talk about that? And sort of what I was looking for, to help me bring this stuff into class. Like, I think as teachers, we read something and jot it down and say, "Ooh, that'd be good for class." And you have your notebook that builds up. But it's hard. Like, sometimes we're inspired and we teach just from the heart that day. We're just inspired. But when life gets really busy and, you're teaching a lot of classes, it's hard to keep that level of inspiration. So I was always looking for like where the information might be together, some quotes, some stories, some ideas to make your own, but to have it. So and it's organized. So it's 3 parts. The first part are like big themes like present moment awareness, surrender, meditation. um, silence. Why would we practice silence? And then the second part is the yamas and niyamas, and each one, like how to bring that into your practice or class. And then the third part of the book are the chakras, the energy body, and the chakras. That's not part of the Yoga Sutras, but um, I think that for practitioners, it's actually important to learn that we're more than just the physical body, that there's an energetic body as well. And when you learn about that, especially the 7 primary chakras, it explains a lot, like you're working with that solar plexus chakra and your sense of will and confidence and warrior poses and the connection to that. It really does. It really just, for me, it explained a lot about, we all have areas that we're strong in, and like the throat chakra. Some people are really good at expressing themselves truthfully, authentically. For some people, it's really hard. So when you learn about the chakras, you sort of know naturally, ooh, I have to work on that one, or oh, I've got that, and it's interesting, and I think helpful to learn about them, and easy to bring into your practice with the movement.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And if people want to get a copy of your book or learn more about it, where can they find them?
Oh, well, everything's on my website, but it's also in any bookstore or Amazon. So hopefully you can find it. Um, Threads of Yoga is the name. So yeah, it was published 2 months ago, so it's pretty new.
Amazing. Amazing. And last question for you. I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the business lessons that you've learned through your career. You've done so much in this yoga space. So I'd love to hear, some of the things you've learned through your time as a teacher.
Well, thanks. I think I've learned I guess most teachers know this, how important it is to maintain your own practice, and sometimes how challenging that is. When life is busy, to prioritize yourself and your practice. Um, and sometimes if you teach a lot, you forget like the good work that you're doing, like how great it is to go to a yoga class and just let go of your worries, your day, whatever, and just get that reset. So as a teacher, as advice, I just want to, don't forget that you're doing something so important, serving others so much, and take a class now and then, just out there, not, and so you can remember how important it is, the work you're doing, and to stay, super open, even if you've had so many years of learning. And there's, I don't know, I just think for all students, learning, and the more open we are, the more we'll be able to absorb and to stay open.
Mm-hmm. And always be students first too, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's one thing for me that, kind of like you just mentioned, the practice has to be where we're grounded from with our teachings. And I think for me, it's like always remembering that I'm a student before I'm a teacher. And I think that that's something that always really helps me when I enter this space, maybe feeling like, not good enough or not having enough information or, whatnot. It's like reminding myself that I'm a student as well.
Yeah. I just was very lucky when I was, starting out. For some reason, I just had the best teachers. So when I started teaching, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for my classes. And I was telling one of my teachers that, like, I almost wanted to apologize, as people are saying goodbye. It's not easy to teach class. And one of my teachers said, oh, don't feel bad. It's their karma to be there.
Oh my gosh. That's so
It
funny.
was funny, but it made me feel better. And, how that's part of my ego as well, so it's all a lesson.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love that. Amazing. Well, thank you for everything you've shared today, Pamela. This has been really great. I know you mentioned where you could find your book, but can you share, links for your website, social media, anywhere else where people can find you online if they want to follow along, learn from you, get your book, all that good stuff?
Oh, sure. Thanks so much for having me, Amanda. Everything's on my website. It's PamelaSeelig.com, and it's S like Sam, EELIG like good. So yeah, I would love to connect with your listeners. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today and just for all the goodness that you've shared with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
All right, friends, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Pamela. Make sure you head on over to her website to check her out. Make sure you check out her book and maybe even get a copy of it. I have a copy of it myself. And from what I've checked out so far, it is really, really, really great. So I would definitely recommend getting yourself a copy. Of course, a huge thank you to OfferingTree for sponsoring this episode of the show. Make sure you go check them out, offeringtree.com/M.B.Om. See if they can help you and your yoga business needs. And if you have any questions, make sure you reach out to them, support@offeringtree.com. And a huge thank you to you for listening to this episode of the show. I am so appreciative that you have listened all the way to the end. All right, that's all for now, and I will see you next week.